And if you don't mind, before we go into the Q&A, actually to quickly recap and just a couple quick questions. So since we have all these other papers like the FAO in 2006 that had the 18% number that animal agriculture is responsible for 18% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and then we have a later report that's 14.5, and some other reports like the Jaipur that's similar. Why is your paper on such a different? Like, what are the reasons why this paper has a different number on a simplified?
There was a paper in 2018 by Searchinger estimating the opportunity cost of land that's being used for animal agriculture. And so that updated everyone's numbers, essentially. And basically, FAO had 0 for the opportunity cost of animal agriculture. So they don't even count it. Because they don't even consider the possibility that that entire industry can disappear. Okay? They think it's absolutely essential that it needs to keep growing. So therefore, there is no opportunity cost. And so that's why they don't even count that. And secondly, there was a paper in 2009 by Goodland and Anhung, which said it was 51%. And so their 51% came from just correcting the errors in the FAO's 2006 report. Okay? And then there was a debate between Goodland and Anhung and the FAO scientists in the Animal Feed Science and Technology Journal in 2010 and 2011. And in that debate, basically the FAO scientists lost the debate. They were asked by the editor to continue the debate, and they declined to continue the debate. And so then in 2014 or 2013, they basically ignored the entire debate and reiterated their number, and they actually reduced it. From 18%, they went down to 14.5%. Okay? So the main difference between the FAO's numbers and Goodland and Anhung's numbers had to do with opportunity cost, and Goodland and Anhung were actually calculating it based on animal breathing. They were using the respiration of animals as a proxy for the opportunity cost. So, and they also had, they were taking into account methane over 20 years as opposed to 100 years. Because methane only lasts in the atmosphere for 8.4 years. That's the half-life of methane. And after that, it becomes CO2. So when it's methane, it is 130 times more powerful than CO2. So by pretending to, by averaging it over 100 years, we are just taking into account 90 years of CO2 and 8.4 years of methane, right? So that it gets averaged out, so that the net effect of methane is weakened by a factor of 5 by doing that. So that's what the FAO was doing. And Goodland and Anhung changed that to 20 years. So that's why their numbers came out to 51%. And then there were other numbers beyond that, beyond the FAO's 14.5%. But in my calculations, I basically took Goodland and Anhung's work because it had been debated. This is how science usually works. It had been debated, and FAO scientists lost the debate. And then I took the opportunity cost that Goodland and Anhung had calculated and deleted that from their calculation, and then added Searchinger's opportunity cost. That's how I came up with 87%, and I stand by it.
Okay, just a quick question for me. So when we're talking about 87%, at least 87% of greenhouse gas emission annually, are we talking about carbon equivalent, or?
Yeah, I mean, see, I showed you a sensitivity analysis, okay, which is a time domain analysis. It's basically a 1-year analysis. That's the detail, and that shows you that there are things that are not being counted. When you just look at greenhouse gases, you're not counting the aerosols that come from the burning machine, right? And those are important because it shows you how, this is how engineers do the work, okay? If you ask me as an engineer, how would you deal with these two machines? This is how I would do it. Literally, we are like a race car driver who's driving at 90 miles an hour, and then he turns a corner and he sees a wall in front of him on the road, 5 seconds away. So you have to figure out now what to do. Do you keep your foot on the accelerator? And do you go into reverse? Do you hit the brake? I mean, what do you do first? So there's an order in which you need to do these things in order to minimize the probability that you're going to die. Okay? So that's the situation we are in. And I'm saying it needs to be done with engineering precision and integrity, scientific integrity.
And that's the intention with the paper, correct? That is being
Exactly.
published hopefully this month, and it's already been peer-reviewed, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. It's been peer-reviewed. It is going to be published in the Journal of Ecological Society later this month, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any expectations towards what's going to happen, or if there's going to be some news around it, or yeah?
Well, we will create some news around. I mean, there will be news around it, and I'm also writing a paper on called "Engineer Solutions to Scientists' Warnings," because scientists have warned twice already. There was a warning issued in 1992, basically saying humanity is going down the tubes if we continue along this path. And then there was a new warning issued in 2017, pointing out that everything that they warned about in 1992 has gotten worse. Okay, except for one thing, except for the ozone hole that they addressed. And it's gotten much, much worse. So we are writing a paper saying, as engineers, if you ask us as engineers, how would you manage spaceship Earth so that it is sustainable? It becomes a sustainable spaceship with a thriving planet in it, right? Then this is what we would do as engineers. This is what we would recommend as engineers. And so that's the paper we are writing. And there we basically say the first thing you need to do is to focus on shutting down the killing machine. It's common sense, right? And in a way, it's common sense. If you are complaining that the planet is dying, why the heck is there a killing machine that's killing everything on the planet?
Right. Okay. And do you have any is there any number or some expectation of when, how long we have, or how severe is?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We know that biodiversity loss is the leading indicator and of how fast things are going down the tubes. Because that's the one that's 100 times bigger than the circle, right? And for biodiversity loss, among the biodiversity loss, it turns out that the loss of animals in our weight class is the leading indicator among that leading indicator. So meaning you need to look at that and see how fast are they dying off. And that will determine how soon you need to change, right? So going by that calculation, the World Wildlife Fund Living Planet report had said that between 1970 and 2010, 52% of all wild vertebrates disappeared. Well, they didn't disappear, they were murdered by human beings. Okay? And between 1970 and 2012, that became 58%. And by 2016, it had become 68%. So at that rate, we are on track to wipe them out by 2026. Okay? Which is why I started the Vegan World 2026 project. Because to me, it is unacceptable that we sit around doing nothing. In fact, I wanted to create an impetus in the other direction, which is I want 0 animals being killed by 2026. Right? Voluntarily killed by human beings. Deliberately killed by human beings. I mean, so
Yeah.
that to me is driving how fast we need to change.
I see. So by 2026, correct?
Yeah. By
So
2026, if we still have a killing machine running around killing animals, we're going to be in big trouble.
yeah. Okay, so I guess Sparrow, I don't know if you have any other questions or recaps you want to do. Otherwise, we'll go into the Q&A.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention to everyone here that, we have a channel called Dr. Sailesh Questions, where you can pose your questions. You can, if you have questions in regards to what Dr. Sailesh has been presenting so far, or if you have any other questions in regards with the environment, in regards with veganism, in regards with other projects that Dr. Sailesh has done, in, for example, the Vegan 2026 paper, or in regards with, let's say, other things that people have questions in regards, how are we going to implement these? So all these you can just post it in Dr. Sailesh Questions, and we will pick it out and we will unmute you to ask the questions. I don't have any other questions so far, Doctor. Thank you for the presentation. Okay, so for the non-vegans, you have a separate channel called Text Channel, where there's a lot of communication going on already. So if any of the non-vegans have any questions, you can post on Text Channel. The vegans can post on Dr. Sailesh Questions.
So is there anyone
that
that
is
already has a question? Sorry?
Yeah, we already have a lot of pinned questions here. So would you like to read out the pinned questions, or do you want to do you want people to post questions now and you can read the pinned questions later? What do you want to do?
Let's just go for the pinned ones, but are they here in the voice call? The ones that have pinned questions?
Okay, let's do that. The ones who are on the voice call and are pinned, let's do them first, I guess. I think I remember seeing CD Marcus here. So, Dr. CD Marcus, would you like to ask your question yourself, Marcus, or would you like me to narrate it for you? You're unmuted. So, would you like to ask the questions, or would you like me to read it out?
Yeah, sure. I'm down to ask the questions. So let me go to the pinned post.
Yeah.
So you'll kind of see a general theme with my questions. I am currently doing a bachelor's degree in geology, so I'm kind of thinking about this from an environmental science perspective. And your presentation touched on that a lot, but I was just wondering. So aside from, let's say, so you mentioned everybody going vegan. There are a couple other like minor things, but then also powering down the burning machine, right? What are other things that people can take upon themselves in addition to potentially, protesting and fighting for these changes in order to mitigate atmospheric carbon release?
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do to create the infrastructure and the institutions for a vegan world. So there is a lot of constructive work that needs to be done as well, in addition to protesting and telling people not to make things worse for us, which is what they're doing now, right? That's what we are trying to avoid, that they don't make things worse for us.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, there is room for protests as well. But I say there is a lot of work that needs to be done on a constructive side, right, to create this new infrastructure and the new system. So literally, we are transforming from the caterpillar to the butterfly. Okay, so that's the kind of massive transformation that's happening, and that has to happen within the next 5 years. So you can imagine the kind of work that needs to be done.
Right. Can I ask one more question, or should we go to somebody else?
No, sure. Go ahead.
Thanks. Let's see. One of my other questions. I've personally talked about this with non-vegans that I know in my personal life, but they understand the impacts of factory farming in terms of environmental consequences and stuff like that. They advocate for these like using unused land and stuff like that for free grazing or whatever. How viable even is that? I know personally, like morally, I stand against that, as do I'm sure most of us in the call. But From an environmental perspective, can you touch on the effects that agriculture has in those spaces?
Yeah, well, the main problem right now is that wild animals are dying. Okay. And now if we say we are going to make a transformation, make a change, rather than factory farming, we want to do regenerative farming of animals. Basically what you're saying is that I need more land to create the same number of cows. So where is that land going to come from? From the animals, right? From the wild animals. So you're going to take more land from them when they are dying fastest, and that's the leading cause. That's the leading indicator. I mean, this is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. Right? So this is why I say none of those things, none of the, let's go back to the way we used to farm animals nonsense is going to work. That's not going to work at all from an engineering perspective. The reason we have factory farms is because that is the most efficient way to extract from the planet. Because these people are, they're just out for money, right? So they've figured out the most efficient way to use these animals. And so this is why I say there's an axiomatic problem in the civilization. So you cannot solve this by keeping the axioms the same, but just doing things differently on the same axiom.
Right. Well, thank you for taking your time to answer those questions and to present. I'll pass it on to somebody else now.
Awesome. Thank you for those questions. I think the next person who has asked questions and is in this chat is Winston here. Let me see. I don't think Winston is here. I don't think Buckluck. Are you here as well? Nope. Okay. So, Alberto, do you want to ask your questions? You've got a couple of questions, right, Alberto? Alberto, can you hear me? Anyway, okay. If Alberto is not going to respond, how about Tomato? You have two questions. Let me just unmute you. There we go. You're unmuted and you asked a couple of questions. Would you like to ask them yourself, or would you like me to read it out for you?
I can have a go. Can you hear me okay? Test?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool, thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation, Dr. Sailesh. It's really interesting. Missed the beginning, hoping to catch the recording. But I have two questions. First one is, in vegan circles, there's some contention around organic farming. So the reason being is that organic farming purchases a lot of animal manure from conventional farms that are growing and killing animals, right? This is deemed to be non-vegan, right? Because it's subsidizing the purchases of meat. I'm wondering if you agree with this, or if you still think that there's value to prefer organic farming, or if you think there's any value in if you would agree that small scale and local organic would be the best solution because it doesn't necessarily have the same problems. So that's the first question.
Yeah, fundamentally, organic is about building back the soil. And there are veganic ways of doing it. You don't really have to use animal manure, especially taking it from somewhere else. We need to start closing the loop on all of our interactions with the planet, right? Because we know the planet has these cycles, these carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycles, and we have an open loop system where we take food from somewhere, move it somewhere else, and we eat it, and then we poop it, and then we send it out into the ocean. So then we wonder, why is that soil dying out? What do you expect? Of course it's going to die out if you have an open loop system. So we need to start closing the loop so that the waste comes back to the land. So this is much more of a holistic way of managing our presence on the planet. Okay, so that and you can let wild animals come and poop there, as opposed to taking manure from livestock and putting it in there.
I completely agree. So that's cool. Is it okay if I ask my second question?
Yep, absolutely.
Sure. I'm just wondering if you've heard or been exposed to permaculture, and if you've got any thoughts on that. And yeah, I'd just be interested to hear what you think.
Absolutely. I think that's the wave of the future. I mean, it's basically going to be food for us. We are not, I really don't think we even have to do cultures anymore. No need to do agriculture or permaculture. Basically, once you bring back the food for us, then it's just harvesting the food as we need it. And there's plenty. There'll be plenty. I calculated that if we went to replace all of the dairy milk that we're consuming today with almond milk, you only need about 0.2% of the trees on the planet to be almond trees. And that will supply all the almond milk you'll need. Okay? So think about that. I mean, we are using so much of the land to produce a cow, and then we are milking the cow to get milk out of her. And you could have done it with just 0.2% of the trees being almond trees.
Nice, thanks. Completely agree. Glad to hear you say it as well. Cheers.
Yeah.
Right, I'm just gonna quickly pick a question from a non-vegan called. Well, I don't know how to say this name actually. So, let me just quickly get their question. So their question is, what are your thoughts on reducing the emissions that is caused by animal reduction? There are many ways we could reduce their emissions, such as feeding them seaweed. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, what are we trying to address? See, if we are focusing just on the fever that the planet has, then you could say, there are ways in which you can reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases because you're only focusing on the fever. But when you look at the entire problem, when you look at the biodiversity loss, the ecosystems collapse, the nitrogen phosphorus loading of the planet, I mean, look at all of the problems, you realize that from a holistic perspective, that doesn't even begin to address it. The only way to really address it is to shut this killing machine down. There's nothing that does not improve when you shut the killing machine down, because it's also based on this idea of human supremacism. That we are more powerful than animals so that we can do whatever we want to them. Well, if you're more powerful than animals, you should be protecting them with that power, right? Not just killing them off. If you kill them all off, you're going to die too. That's the law of nature.
Would it be analogous to say that sort of dealing with the problem at the branches of the tree rather than the root?
At the roots, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Right. Sparrow, do you have another question for us?
Yeah, we can just read other. We have a lot of questions, Papa, so that's good.
Okay.
The next question, I'm going from those who asked first and asking their questions. Since Winston and Buckluck are not here, I've asked Alberto. Do you want to try asking a question now, or do you want me to just read it out for you?
I guess.
Your mic is slightly soft,
Okay.
so maybe you could. Yeah, you can ask your questions.
Alberto, can you hear us?
Yeah. You hear me?
Yeah, you can.
Your volume. Could you speak up?
Okay. So first of all, Uma, such.
Alberto,
you're cutting out. You're cutting out.
Yeah.
Okay. Then
do you want me to just ask a question instead?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Alberto has 4 questions. The first question is, you talk about 2026 being the year 0, which is just 5 years from now. So how do you imagine 2026 to happen? I mean, to look like if almost nothing is done? That's his first question.
If nothing is done.
I mean, so basically today,
Right.
Veganism is still a very small movement. We've got like the percentage of human population who are vegans are actually 1 to 3%. And the movement is highly, highly misinformed as well on a global standpoint.
Right.
So if we look at, there's a lot to uncover. There's a huge mountain to uncover. So if thinking of that mountain in mind, how is the 5-year plan? How is it justified? Or what are your points or topic? Why do you think that 5-year plan can be achieved?
Yeah, basically, to me, veganism is, or new ideas like this, it's like an infection. So, but it's an infection that you want people to get, right? And so dispelling ignorance, these things can be done through documentaries, through movies, through media. This is how you infect people into veganism, right? And you saw that COVID-19 infected a lot of people very quickly. So infections can happen very quickly. So this is an exponential process. So it doesn't matter to me, it's only 3% right now, that it's just, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how would I improve the infection rate? How would I get people to be inspired, to join the movement? And so there are parameters that we are looking at. Okay, what are the, so we have to minimize the recidivism ratio, we maximize the spontaneous uptake of veganism. And so we are working on documentaries, art, animations, movies, things like that to communicate the message to people. And of course, we are fighting an industry that's trying to spread its message and literally destroy the planet in the process.
Right, doctor. So I guess what Alberto was trying to ask, sorry, he just messaged me and said there's a slight increment to the question. If today nothing is done, since you said that 2026 is the vegan world, if let's say from today nothing is going to happen, there is going to be no change. What will happen in 2026 if there is no change today? There is no incrementation.
There is no change. Yeah.
Yeah.
If things stay as they are and we keep killing animals at the rate at which we're killing them, we pretty much will wipe out the ecosystems of the planet by 2026. Meaning they'll be functionally extinct. You may still have a tiger or a few jaguars, that you can keep alive and pretend that they're not extinct for another 50 years, whatever their lifespan is. But you'd just be fooling ourselves.
There's a difference between functional extinction and actual extinction, doctor. That's what you're trying to say.
Right. Functional extinction meaning that biomass is not viable anymore.
Right. Okay. The second question is, Our World in Data is a project by Oxford University that uses a lot to explain the environmental impact, because Alberto in particular thinks that the Oxford is a credible authority. So what is your opinion about the Our World in Data? Is their estimation on 26% of GHG's emissions? So what is your perception on their estimation?
Well, Our World in Data also uses data from the FAO. I think it's a Hans Rosling project, if I'm not mistaken, Our World in Data. And and the FAO's numbers are all straight from the industry. It's like going to the tobacco industry and saying, hey, how good is tobacco for human health? And they'll tell you it's good for you. Okay, there are even papers by the tobacco industry pointing out that smoking Marlboro Lights actually cures lung cancer. If you want to buy that. So this is why I say science has to be done with unbiased observers. Okay, that's the fundamental way in which you get truth in science, is to have unbiased observers. And it's impossible to have an unbiased observer when the observer is being paid by an industry. And then when we accumulate data from that, you're going to get garbage. So that's why none of these databases have taken into account the opportunity cost correctly. We know that on that grazing land, 37% of the land area of the planet, if we just return the original forest that used to be there in 1800, so this is what we did. Okay, we took the grazing land and wherever there were forests in 1800, we replaced it. And that alone, by doing it in the model, we showed that you can sequester 265 gigatons of carbon by just doing that, and on only 41% of that land, because the other 59% were deforested before 1800. So we have no clue what kind of forest biomes were there. So just bringing back the original forest that used to be there on that grazing land, you can literally reverse climate change. 265 gigatons of carbon is greater than the 240 gigatons of carbon that we've added to the atmosphere since 1750. Okay? So where is that in the 26% that Oxford is calculating. Obviously, it's not being counted. So, and you look at, okay, who did these calculations? 95% or 99% of scientists are meat eaters. Do you think they will tell you the truth?
That's a point I hadn't thought about. It's quite funny now. When you put it, it's quite funny, actually.
Science,
Sad.
I mean, you get biases in science. So we have to, this is what we do as engineers. So as engineers, I don't take everything I get, straight up. I look at it, I analyze it, I understand the source of it, and then I figure out who's telling me the truth, who's not telling me the truth. Because I have to build something that actually works. Right? So this is what I'm trained to do as an engineer, to look at scientific papers and throw out the things that don't match reality.
Yes, doctor. Okay, the next question that Alberto asked was, there are two more questions. Maybe we can try to go a bit more paced because we have a lot more questions. That's good. The next question is there any hope on recovering the soil that animal agriculture is destroying? For example, the issue is soil erosion. So is there any hope on recovering the soil? And if there is, how?
Yeah. Turns out nature is very resilient. Okay? And there are, we have shown examples where we have taken land that used to be desert and turned that into native forest. So you can look up Sadhana Forest, what they've done over the last, I think, 15 years, they did that. They took land in Pondicherry that was literally, rocks and desert and turned that into the original forest that used to be there. So you just need, a little bit of vegetation to take hold, and then using that, you can then create more soil. So life is a renewable process if you catch it in time.
Thank you, doctor. The last question by Alberto is talking about spirituality, which is based on belief, in the scientific community, which is based on empiricism. Mm-hmm. Can be sometimes a scientific message to be lost because it can be felt as pseudoscience. Right. Aren't you afraid that talking about spirituality might eclipse such an important message?
Well, I'm talking about axioms. And, if your axioms are wrong, your science is wrong. Okay, so, and we know that. Before Galileo and Copernicus, they were thinking that the sun goes around the earth, and their calculations were all wrong. And they couldn't, predict how the planets were moving. It's only after we switched the axioms that Newton was able to figure out that, the law of gravity, and then predict the motions of the planets and so on, right? So the axioms had to be corrected. In the same way, right now, we have axioms that are wrong. And unless you correct those axioms, you are going to be doing bad things in science too.
Sorry to interject. Could you explain what you mean by axiom? Talking about like fundamental beliefs. Yeah. So
an axiom is a statement that you take as the truth because it's empirically true. Because, and you don't need to go any further to understand whether it's true or not. Like, like all of Euclidean geometry is based on axioms. Axiom that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's an axiom, right? And so, so that's why I say, the axiom of consumerism, we have bought into it because you see 1,000, 3,000 ads a day, because we have bought into it. And that axiom is absolutely false. This is why half of American adults are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications or are illegal drugs on a regular basis. And America is all about the pursuit of happiness. So do we suck at it? We don't even know how to get to the pursuit of. No, our axioms are wrong.
So if I'm not mistaken, right? So we're talking about a statement that it seems self-evident, and when you're
Right.
referring to that, it's a false axiom. You're referring that it seems as if it's something that's self-evident, as if it's true, just because it seems so obvious, yet it's wrong. Just like the example with the sun going around the Earth, it seemed
Right.
very self-evident and obvious that the sun would go around the Earth, yet we found out that's actually a false axiom.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right, and
So
in this case, we're talking about we believe as if it seems self-evident that consumerism brings happiness and pleasure. It seems obvious because we desire, etc. But you're saying that doesn't. It's actually false. It actually isn't the case that is what brings happiness and etc.
Right. Right. Okay. It's just like empirically you look at the world and you see, oh, the sun is going right, and you think that that's true. In the same way, if you're really, really hungry and someone gives you something to eat, you do get happiness, pleasure from that, right? So then you say, well, if I'm hungry and I eat, I get pleasure. Therefore, if I consume more and more and more, I should be getting more and more happiness. And it doesn't happen. Okay, so it's not a straight line, which is what we assumed. And so there is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect says that what is empirically true in the beginning then sort of plateaus, and then it goes down, and then it goes up again. So essentially, it's like you get this mount of false ignorance, peak of mount ignorance, they call it, peak of mount ignorance, and then you fall down into the valley of minimalism, and then you rise up again to the plateau of sufficiency for consumerism. So, and as you follow that, your happiness does increase.
That's nice, Doctor. The next question is by the Reborn one. We actually addressed the 2026 number. Would you like to re-ask it, or can we skip to Ashvio's question? The Reborn one, are you here? Oh, you are there, but you're server muted. I'm just going to unmute you. Okay, I'll ask the question. So, Doctor, since we already discussed about the 2026 number, and you mentioned how creating better forms of messengers in terms of documentaries, movies, arts, and other ways of getting the message out there is one of the many ways. But what other ways do you see that we can reach the 2026 target?
Yeah, the main focus right now for me is building the infrastructure and the institutions necessary for a vegan world by 2026.
Right.
If you build the infrastructures, like a new currency system, that actually measures our ecological footprint correctly and constrains it so that we will never go over the limits of the planet. That should be the real role of a currency system. So that's the current you want to see. And when we build something like that and then have people start using it, that will accelerate the adoption of veganism.
That's nice, Doctor. Okay, the next question is by Ashvio. Ashvio, do you want to ask it yourself? Let me just unmute you.
Just right before we continue, I just want to say, anyone that is non-vegan as well, please feel free to put down your question in the text channel, and we'll let you ask the question as well. Feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, you can ask the question from you, because I'm kind of sick from the vaccine, but
Sure, I'll do that.
thanks.
Just a second. So, Doctor, this is a question which even I relate with, and I'm sure you also relate with it. How do we convince Indians to stop drinking dairy? As we know, India is the biggest consumer of dairy, one of the leading exporters of beef, the third leading consumer of chicken, and plus India is one of the countries where it's highly it's really dependent on culture, and it really prides culture. So
Right.
how do we convince Indians to stop drinking dairy? And this task seems just as hard as doing the same for Americans eating meat.
Right. No, I mean, India, we have a lot of stories that we use to transmit our culture from generation to generation. The stories of Krishna are associated with dairy consumption, because it's been cleverly used by the dairy industry. The stories of Krishna are all symbolic, because Krishna lifted a mountain with his little finger. And you ask, from a physics perspective, what kind of finger is that can lift a mountain? Right? So you start looking at the kind of forces that need to be held by that finger and so on. You realize, come on, how is that even possible? Right? So what does that mean? That Krishna lifted a mountain with his little finger. Krishna danced on the hood of a 7-headed snake. Where is this 7-headed snake? Are there fossil records of 7-headed snakes that lived 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago? No. So what does that mean? So Krishna lifted a mountain with his little finger, and he sheltered the people of Gokul underneath the mountain, which means that if you believe in him, he will shelter you from the trials and tribulations of. He danced on the hood of a 7-headed snake, which means that he overcame the 7 chakras. He opened the 7 chakras. So he overcame fear, guilt, shame, grief, lies, delusions, and attachments. Those are the 7 heads of a snake. So he was enlightened. So Krishna loves butter. What does that mean? Milk represents the fluid mind that has doubts about God, to which you add curd, which is the thought of God, and you let it curdle in your mind. And you churn it, and you meditate. You get a solid mind that has no more doubts about God. And that's what Krishna loves. So he loves the mind of a devotee. You take that butter and you refine it. You get ghee, which is the refined solid mind that has no doubts about. That's why we use ghee in our aratis. It signifies enlightenment. So there are these beautiful stories with symbolism, and it has been misinterpreted, taken literally, out of context, and used to sell dairy and milk, dairy products, to a population that is mostly lactose intolerant. Indians are suffering from consuming all that dairy. India has the highest rate of diabetes now. Okay? You're being fooled. We are being fooled into consuming stuff that's bad for you. Why? Because dairy is the vehicle of colonialism. Animal agriculture is how colonialism is propagated. So you're being colonized. We have been colonized all along. And we are continuing to play along with the colonizers by consuming their products, these products. Okay? So this is an education that needs to happen. And we have a documentary coming out called The Land of Ahimsa, which talks about that. And so that should be out very soon. In fact, my next meeting is about that documentary. And so that focuses on India, and that talks about this dairy story as well, and how we are being fooled into doing things that are bad for us.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, looking at the amount of time left, I want to see how fast we can get to go the next of the questions. The next question is, how do we get a vegan world without abolishing capitalism, which profits from these industries and will fight to the death to keep them going?
Right.
So how do we achieve a vegan world with capitalism still in play?
No, basically, you need to create a vegan currency, vegan institutions, and vegan infrastructure that is distributed and not capitalistic and colonialistic, right? So it's a non-exploitative way of doing business. How would you do that? Well,
Yeah.
it has to be distributed, decentralized. And once you put that in place and people start using that, and you can actually create this infrastructure and make it so that it can be used in parallel with the current structures. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can do both. And when we do that, eventually people will say, I don't like this archaic way of doing things anymore, and I'm going to switch to the new one completely. So that will happen automatically. Okay, so this is how we are designing the transformation. We're designing it so that whatever we do can be used in conjunction with the current system. So there is a transition process that happens.
That's great, Doctor. Thank you. So the next question is asked by Shadows. Shadows, you want to ask yourself, or would you like me to ask it? Let me unmute you. Sorry for a second. Yeah, I unmuted you. You can ask your question.
Yes. So 2 brief questions. The first one would be whether or not you have seen David Attenborough's recently famous documentary called Alive on Our Planet, and if so, whether or not you have any feedback or honest criticisms of it.
I haven't seen it. I think it's on my list to see, actually. It's on Netflix, right? Am I mistaken?
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix, Doctor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second one is, do you think it would be safe to say that if the world was vegan, the corona pandemic would not have happened, since after all, it's a zoonotic virus?
Right. Anytime we stress animals, there is a potential for another pandemic. Because when animals are stressed, their immune system basically gives up, because it's basically fighting survival, right? So it's trying to survive. It's focused on that. And therefore, the viruses in the animals start multiplying. And then they jump. So this is how you get all these viruses that could have been suppressed by the immune system of the animal, jumping from animal to. And so every time we stress animals, we are essentially running a Monte Carlo experiment for the next pandemic. And so when we try to kill 80 billion animals a year and raise them in stressed conditions, when we put animals in laboratories to experiment upon them, we put them in zoos, in cages, and we put them in circuses and make them do things they don't want to do, everything that we do there is a potential for another pandemic. And so, yeah, I mean, none of these pandemics would have happened if we had not been stressing animals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question. Before we move to the next questions, I just want to address some important questions in regards with the whole paper. The first question would be, what is GWP100 and what is the problem with it? So if, for those who are listening, Dr. Sailesh and Goodlang and Anhang, they approached their entire climate study completely differently. They didn't take a GWP100, as in they did not take a 100-year span. They took a much lesser time. So what is the 100-year span and what is the problem with it, Doctor? That's the first question.
Well, we are comparing different greenhouse gases who behave differently in the atmosphere. So the greenhouse gas that everything is compared against is CO2, carbon dioxide. And because that has this long lifetime in the atmosphere, depending on whether or not you're reforesting. Okay, if you reforest, it doesn't have a long lifetime in the atmosphere because you can suck it down. But if you're not reforesting, if you're going to just set it up in the atmosphere and wait for nature to sequester it herself, then it's going to take a long time because it has to go through the rock weathering process, which has a lifetime of, I think, 10,000 to 100,000 years. So because of that, all the other greenhouse gases are measured against CO2. So we do the CO2 equivalent of a gas. To do the CO2 equivalent of a gas, you have to look at how much that gas is heating up the atmosphere and compare it with how much CO2 is heating up the atmosphere. So then it becomes a question of how long do you measure this? heating up the atmosphere? Do you do it over 20 years? Do it over 100 years? Or do we do it, over 1 year period? So that'll be like instantaneous. And for methane and the other gases like nitrous oxide, nitrous oxide has a lifetime of 100 years in the atmosphere. Methane has a lifetime of 8.4 years. But when it is methane, it is extremely powerful. This is why if you look at the numbers I showed you, on an annual basis, methane causes more heating than CO2. Okay, right now, if you ask me, how much of all the gases we're putting into the atmosphere, what is causing the most heating? It's methane. Okay, by almost a factor of 3. So, since animal agriculture is the leading cause of methane, the industry wants us to average over 100 years. Because then for 90 years, it's CO2. It's not methane. Because methane becomes CO2. Methane reacts with hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere and becomes CO2. So the industry loves to measure over 100 years. And Goodland and Anand said, why are we measuring over 100 years when climate change is an immediate problem? This was in 2009, and they said 20 years. We need to solve it in the next 20 years. Now I'm saying it's a 10-year. It's not even 10 years. We need to look at instantaneous methane, what it's doing on an annual basis. That's why I showed you the instantaneous impact of the killing machine and the burning machine on an annual basis. And that will let us make decisions right now as to what we... Who cares what happens in 100 years if you're already dead? So that's why Goodland and Anand used GWP 20. And I was just updating Goodland and Anand's numbers, so I stuck with the GWP 20. But I actually calculated it also with GWP 100, and there also it came up with 87% as the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture, because the opportunity cost is so large, it swamps out anything else. Okay? Because every time we eat animal foods, we are saying we don't want that forest to come back. We'd rather it stay as grazing land for animals, right? Because if one fine day, if all humanity goes plant-based, so which means we replace the 15% of the food that we are currently taking from animals with plant-based alternatives, then the forest will come back right away, right? So which means every time we eat, we are making a decision. We don't want that forest to come back. That's the opportunity cost.
Right. Awesome, Doctor. So since we're talking about getting the forests to return, there is one more question which is quite important, which I thought we should talk about. What are your, this is asked by Bordoga. What are your thoughts on wild animal suffering? Do you think that we should intervene? If yes, why and in what ways should we conduct intervention? If no, why? Since we're talking about letting the forests rewild, that will lead to a lot of wildlife returning, and that will also lead to, as we know how nature is so cruel, it will lead to a lot of wildlife suffering as well.
Well, yeah. So this is like saying, I want to minimize suffering. So if I want to minimize suffering, why don't I just kill everybody off? There'll be no more suffering in the world, right? And that's true. And on an objective measure, that's correct, right? But it's not about minimizing suffering. It's about being respectful of all life, giving them their dignity to live out their lives. And when you're respectful and when you look at nature with reverence, you automatically will make the right decision. I'm not going to tell you this is the right way to do it. It's up to you to decide. But I'm saying, please start with that attitude of reverence towards nature, and the rest will follow. Because as Krishna points out in the Bhagavad Gita, the way you decide what to do at any given situation, it depends on your dharma, swadharma, which is what is the right thing to do for yourself. Then it depends on what is the right thing to do for your family, for the family that you... So your family could be the whole of life. So then you would say, what is the right thing to do for the whole of... The third is, what is the right thing to do for the age you are? So this is the Yuga Dharma. So for this age, given that we have polluted all that, given that all this chemical pollution is out there in the environment, what is the right thing to do? Okay, and I would say, stop eating animal foods for sure, because you're getting the same chemical pollution in the animal foods concentrated by a factor of 100, because that's what animal foods do. And then finally, it's what's the right thing to do out of compassion and love. The Sanatana Dharma. So then you look at the intersection of all these dharmas and decide, you choose what is the right thing to do. So that's how I would intervene if I had to intervene.
Sure, doctor.
Sparrow, do we have another question regarding morality or regarding intervention? Or
Let me see.
while we look for another question like that, I think it's a good idea to even get even more fundamental and hopefully ask if you could, in a very simplified form, explain us what even is, like, because we're saying that these gases, warm the earth, and so the question is, like, what even is a greenhouse gas effect? Why do these gases, like, warm up the earth?
Right. So every molecule has a profile over which it will reflect radiation. So, energy is radiation, right? So energy is coming from the sun in the form of ultraviolet and visible radiation and infrared radiation. And then it heats up the earth, and then the earth puts out infrared radiation. So the earth is basically getting heated up, and its heat is going back up into space. So when the two are in equilibrium, that's when the earth has reached an equilibrium temperature. Now, it turns out that if there are no gases in the atmosphere at all, the earth's temperature would be like negative 30 degrees, something like that. It'll be very cold. So the thing that's heating up the earth is the greenhouse gases. Why? Because the greenhouse gases, so they have a profile, like CO2 has a profile that it will trap more, it'll reflect more energy in the infrared region. So which is why there is more heat coming from the earth in the infrared region than coming from the sun. Okay? So this is why there is heat trapping that happens because of CO2. Now, different molecules like methane has a different profile, and nitrous oxide has a different profile. These are all different frequency ranges over which it's trapping energy. And the energy is trapping is both from the sun and from the earth. But depending on which frequency the energies are coming from the sun and from the earth, you will get more of a greenhouse gas effect or a reflective effect or cooling effect. So some gases have cooling effects, some gases have heating effect. So, but every gas has both cooling and heating, some form of it. So there is nothing that we emit that doesn't have an impact. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, Sparrow, did you find any?
No, I think all the morality-based questions have been answered. There are a lot more questions though in regards with, for example, there's someone called, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but they're the third person. They're the first person in chat actually. Spinif Hinge. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it completely wrong, but they asked, what is the enrichment that will happen in 2026 if there are still killing machines? So, Doctor, we already went around these questions. We discussed about the 2026 number quite a number of times. So I'm going to skip over that question. I'm going to go to subtle bump fuzzle. If I understood it right, Dr. Sailesh said it's not about changing the fuel of the machine. So would you like to ask you a question? I'm going to call you Subtle. I do want to ask you a question. Let me just unmute you. If you are here, okay, you're not here, unfortunately. Then I can ask a question. Doctor said, you said it's not about changing the fuel of the machine, but changing the machine itself. So they're saying they would love if you could elaborate, especially on how this can be implemented. I think this is again in regards to the 2026 number. How you said we had to create institutions, we had to create a system of currency, for example. We had to create our own system which kind of derails this whole consumerism and derails the whole thought process, that the whole axioms that we are on now, which are absolute false axioms. So if we derail these, we can achieve 2026 number quite efficiently. Next question was by Dark Compassion. Dark Compassion, would you like to ask your question? You can. I'm going to unmute you. Let me see if the question is related to any of the questions I've already spoken about.
Did you unmute me?
Yeah, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
okay. Cool. So yeah, my question was mainly on the practical side of how are we supposed to close down the killing machines and further down the burning machines. Like, what are the immediate actions? And okay, you talked about documentaries and education and all that stuff, but there is going to be more fundamental change and more fundamental actions in the society where all of this is so deeply rooted. Do you have any ideas or any suggestions on how to go about it?
Yeah, that's my focus is on building new institutions, new infrastructure, a new constitution, and a new currency for a vegan world, so that we have the alternatives in place before we tell the current system that it's all messed up and they need to shut down, right? If we tell them to shut down and we don't have an alternative, what are we going to use to organize ourselves? So we would be left without anything. So this is why I'm focusing on the constructive aspect of this transformation first, before we persuade people to leave the old one.
Could you maybe give an example of building of institutions?
Right. So, for instance, look up Holochain. Holochain, HOLOCHAIN. And so I'll just put the name in the text. So Holochain is a computing infrastructure that encrypts everything from the outset and makes it distributed. So it's like a distributed blockchain.
Okay.
And what that does is it prevents anyone from figuring out what you're saying and then advertising to you. It's impossible to do advertising within that framework. Okay. So fundamentally now the infrastructure is set up in a way that that the old model cannot be implemented. The old axioms cannot be implemented anymore. So those are the kinds of infrastructure that we need to put in place. So we have, the initial group of Holochain hosts. There are about 300 of us now, and about 1,000 people have bought these boxes. So, and we are creating a new set of apps and infrastructure on this that would also host the new currency systems. Okay, that would make it, distributed and simultaneously. It's like having blockchain and BitTorrent in one. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Awesome, Doctor. The next question is by Vegan Boy. Do you want to ask it yourself, or shall I unmute? Shall I ask it for you? I'll unmute you either way. There we go. You're unmuted now, and you can ask your question yourself if you want to.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to ask about my specific country. It's not about the world. Like when you say about vegan 2026, in my country, I'm from Indonesia. Like from what I researched, the number one cause of deforestation and environmental destruction is not really animal agriculture. It's about the palm oil industry. And I just want to know, how do you approach this kind of society that the one of the leading cause of deforestation and environmental destruction is not animal agriculture, but we need to but we want to make vegan world by 2026.
Yeah, I mean, that's for processed foods, processed plant foods, and like palm oil. Now, if you look at who's really doing the deforestation, it's Cargill, one of the major companies that's doing it. And Cargill is one of the biggest producers of animal foods. So you ask, why are they going and doing it over there, and why are they publicizing it? They want to tell you that even veganism will destroy the planet. So don't bother. Continue eating animal foods. That's the story. I'm looking at the overall number from the IPCC, and I'm saying 85% of the food is coming from half of the cropland. So clearly, by eliminating animal foods, we'll be returning so much land. I'm not saying we need to go and destroy forests in Indonesia just to grow palm oil. You can clearly do it anywhere. Why do you have to go destroy a forest to do that? Because it's the cheapest way to do it. That's the trouble we are in. Okay, we are just measuring everything based on this one number. And so it's the easiest to go do it in Indonesia because people are selling the land cheaper for you to do this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is by Lithiel. Lithiel, Doctor, he's a new vegan. They went vegan about, I think, a day or 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a couple of
Welcome.
questions. Let me just... Lithiel, you're unmuted now. You can ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My question is, the media portrays vegan lie. How do we show that we don't have a lot of time and we need to stop eating meat?
Lithiel, you're kind of cutting out and your voice is quite soft as well.
My question is, the media portrays vegans in a bad light. How do we show people that we don't have a lot of time and we need to eat?
Yeah, the media will portray vegans in a bad light. The media will, because it's antithetical to the current system, because we are questioning the fundamental axiom of supremacism. Okay? But simultaneously, we need to understand that human supremacism is the cultural bedrock on which all other forms of supremacy flourish. Literally, when we practice human supremacism, we are watering the roots of colonialism, racism, ableism, patriarchy, slavery, every one of the otherism. Okay? So, regardless of how the media portrays veganism, you're on the right side. Okay?
Thank you.
And of course, the media is going to say bad things about vegans because they're trying to protect their turf. Because they're running a Ponzi scheme. Okay, they're running an ecological Ponzi scheme. And media is the publicity wing of that ecological Ponzi scheme.
Well, thank you, Doctor, for answering my question.
Sure.
Phil, do you have any other question still, or is that the only one?
Yes, I have another question. Yeah, you can ask your question.
I had another question, but we can continue. We can.
No, that's okay. You can ask.
My apologies. Just find it. My.
Do you want us to get back to you, or would you like to?
No, you can get back to. Yeah, you can get back to me.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, you can mute your mic. The next question is by Johnny Bad Numbers. I'm going to see if you're here. I'm going to unmute you, and if you want, you can ask your question. Okay, fine. I can ask your question for yourself. No problem. Now, the question by Johnny is, the Amazon is being destroyed for soy, which is being used for crop feed. But the more people that go vegan, the soy would still be produced because we're trying to feed people now. So will the Amazon be okay with the amount of soy production that might be required in a vegan world?
Right. So I try to address that in the numbers I showed you. How much food are we eating? How much food are the animals eating? The Amazon is being destroyed for two reasons. One is to create grazing land for cattle, And the second is to grow soy to feed animals. Because fundamentally, the soy that you can grow in the Amazon is GMO soy. You cannot grow organic soy in the Amazon, because the Amazon, when you destroy it, it's impossible to destroy a forest by just cutting it down. It'll come back. So all the seeds are there in the soil for the Amazon to return. So the only way to grow soy on land that you deforested from the Amazon is to first pour Roundup and kill anything that would grow, except for your GMO soy. So this is how they're growing soy in the Amazon. Basically pouring Roundup to kill the Amazon and then growing soy on that land. So that GMO soy is hardly eaten by human beings, because that's edible by for animals only.
Sure, doctor. Thank you, doctor. The next question is, we did speak about this kind of relatively, but Madhu, would you like to ask your question again? This is a lot more concentrated towards capitalism as a question. Madhu, let me see if I can unmute you. Yeah, I can unmute you. You can ask a question yourself, or would you like me to skip and go to the next question, since we already spoke about this in kind of a general topic? That we the current system that we are in may not really support. So we'll have to create our own alternatives. And
right.
Madhu, you can ask your question, or I can. Okay. Anyway, Madhu is not unmuting, so.
Hold on.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
So my question is this: you talked a lot about consumerism and how it's a false axiom that leads us down this path towards destruction. And so I'm just wondering whether or not your issues with consumerism are exclusive to just consumerism, or if it also extends to the rest of capitalism.
Well, capitalism is founded on both consumerism and supremacy. So both the axioms are built into this capitalist system, and I think both of them have to go. Right, both of them are false axioms. It is not true that we are superior, and who are we to go judge other species and say they're inferior to us? Right, and so because we are measuring it based on our own yardsticks, a dog may look at us and say, "God, this dude doesn't even smell that." Right? So, we have very poor sense capabilities than lots of other species. So supremacism is also built into capitalism. So that's why we are able to go and take away land from other animals, take away land from other people, enslave people. All these things are all part of the supremacist mindset.
Thank you, doctor. The next question is in regards with what are your thoughts on I should ask Omar. Do you want to ask a question yourself? I'm going to unmute you. Okay, thanks, Omar. The question is, Doctor, Omar would like to hear your thoughts on ephilism.
On what?
On ephilism. EFILISM. Ephilism.
I'm sorry, I don't know what that is.
Okay, no problem, Doctor. The next question is by Odin. Odin, I'm going to unmute you. You can ask your question yourself.
I think Odin wants the question to be asked by us.
Yeah, let me ask it. The question by Odin is, Doctor, as an engineer yourself, do you know if a mechanical engineer can aid veganism? And if so, how?
Oh, a mechanical engineer can. Yeah, well, mechanical engineers are building all the tools for factory farms, right? So, how would you aid veganism? Well, you have to figure out. Tell you what, I have a great project for you if you're a mechanical engineer. There is a compost toilet facility in Sadhana Forest. And I have been thinking about how would you make that automatic, as opposed to people having to do it in drums and then taking the drums and then putting it somewhere else and then creating the soil out of that. So that's a great project if you can do that. So meaning, what would be the new sewage system? It's really not a sewage anymore. It's actually a recycling system. Okay, because in Sadhana Forest, once you go there, you have to be vegan, because if you eat animals, then you're going to create a lot of toxins in the waste. So they insist that everyone who comes there is vegan, or at least you're only given vegan food to eat, because they're recircling and they're reusing the waste. So a lot of systems have to become closed loop, and a lot of that requires mechanical engineering.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, just to go back to the previous question and what ephilism is, ephilism can mean antinatalism. It's a philosophical position and also a social movement that believes that there is a negative value to birth. They believe that people should not have babies because it is morally bad. So do you have an opinion on that philosophical position?
Well, we have been told a story that there are too many people on the planet. That's a story that capitalism has been telling us, the media has been telling us. But we have to keep growing. Okay, we have to grow the economy, but there are too many people. And the implication is that expect a lot of people to die off. So they're preparing the ground for the inevitable depopulation that's going to happen. I'd much rather look at things differently. Much rather say, given how many people are there on the planet, how would you do things? Number one. And clearly the killing machine has to be shut down, right? And once you do that, you realize there is plenty on the planet for us right now. And there is a need for 7.8 billion people on the planet because there's a lot of cleanup work to be done. Okay? So a lot of cleanup work to be done. A lot of animals have to be brought back to life. I mean, there's a lot of midwifery that needs to happen, nursery work that needs to be done to bring back the forests. And as we create a society in which we are treated equally, we are treated well, and we do have the freedom to do what we want, we will automatically have less children. We've seen that time and again in society, in human society. When people feel secure, they have less children. So the human population will automatically come down over time in the butterfly economy. So we're in a caterpillar economy, which is all about growth. Okay? So transitioning to the butterfly economy, you will automatically have stability and equilibrium. So I don't judge anyone as being superfluous and that we shouldn't be having children and things like that. I mean, if my son did not have my granddaughter, I wouldn't be where I am. So, because she literally changed my life.
That's great, Doctor. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dantas, would you like to ask further questions? You said you had 2 questions to ask.
Yeah. Okay. I have a couple questions. So hopefully we can get them out quick because we're over time. I think we're getting close to yeah. I mean we're getting close because we have been doing it for I think about 2 hours now, so which is amazing. And thank everyone for being here. So do you have any comments on Alan Savory's claims about soil regenerative agriculture with cows?
Yeah, I mean, see, fundamentally, the way grazing lands are maintained to be grazing lands today is by setting fires annually. So we take anything that the cows did not eat, and we chop it all down and we burn it, because we don't want anything that the cows did not eat to be there. Okay, so Alan Savory comes along and he says, okay, I won't do that. I won't do the grazing maintenance fires anymore. We'll let the land come back. Well, you let the land come back, there'll be less and less for the cows to eat, so you need more land. So it comes down to the same thing. If you want more land, where is it coming from? From wild animals. Is that what you need to be doing right now? It's the exact opposite of what you need to be doing right now. So to me, Alan Savory is just trying to perpetuate the old system with the old false axioms and trying to gloss it over and say, okay, we can actually bring back carbon while grazing animals. That's all he's doing. He's just not burning the grazing maintenance fires.
Okay, thank you. And regarding Cowspiracy and some numbers that were brought up, some that you haven't mentioned, is there any other numbers you have changed your mind on, you think are worse or less or were wrong? Is there any, you have any thoughts on that?
No, most of all the facts have remained, and so we have a Cowspiracy facts page where we update as we get better numbers. And so that you can just look it up, cowspiracy.com/facts, and you will see the new, you will see the references and the changes that have happened.
Right. So we also saw, because we streamed Seaspiracy in the server, and yeah, it just came out as a huge movie, somewhat similar to that, how Cowspiracy was. Do you have any comments on it? I think I think it reached #1 on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's an awesome movie. It was done by this Ali Tabrizi and AUM Films. Kip Anderson was a producer as well, and I think it showed that the devastation that we're doing in the ocean is an order of magnitude worse than the devastation we are doing on land. And for much less food too. So it's just ridiculous what we are doing there. So just 3% of our food comes from the ocean, and we are literally destroying the ocean for that. So, this is why it's going to have a huge impact. Hey, I have another meeting at 11, so I'm sorry I have to cut it off.
Oh,
yeah, that's completely understandable. Sorry for keeping you so long. I'm not sure if you have to go immediately, but if you have anything else you would like to say, promote or talk about, or like some final statement, feel free to do so.
Sure. So thank you so much for hosting this. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you for the great questions. And but join us for the Vegan World 2026 Convergence. I'd like to see a lot of your participation in that, because we have a lot of work to do to build out the new system, and we could use your help.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, we have a lot more questions. So maybe if we could have another of this session, it'll be really helpful.
Sure, we can do it next Friday if you want.
Sure. Thank you so much. For all those whose questions have not been answered yet, please keep it in mind, and you can ask them, and we'll pin it, and we'll ask it next Friday.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah, we'll combine what we're gonna do next week. But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Sure, my pleasure.